This morning. As we discussed last time, we're going to go to a bi-monthly type thing starting next year. So sometime after the first year, we'll come up with what we're going to be doing to let you know what the plans are for February. So I'll get that up here before long, and we'll go from there. But last week we started talking about, and I put a T instead of a K up here. How about that? I can't write this morning. There we go. I'm already moving on to the next word, and
I do that.
I know
I do that
it's
all
like
the time. And then I have to autocorrect it like 4 different times because I'm like, this is wrong. I'm not spelling this correctly, and I'm just missing the last letter.
Right. That's the way it happens sometimes. My mind gets to working too fast, then my fingers can write.
ADHD.
But, oh Lord. But a couple of weeks ago, the last time we met, we introduced this thought about the Backslider's Roadmap back to God. And on a side note, I guess you could say we learned a very valuable lesson last night about how important a roadmap can actually be to keep us from driving around in needless circles. We hadn't used one up until the point that we did make that one obvious circle last night. So, but after that, then we knew where we could see where roads were that we had and hadn't been down, and we snaked our way back through. So, like I said, road maps, as we know, can be very useful for us as far as just our own information. If you're going to go somewhere you've never been before, it's always nice to have a road map. Now, the advantage that we have today versus when I first started driving back in the Stone Ages, we had tablets that had roads chiseled. No, I'm kidding. But we had road atlases, and if you wanted to know how to get from here to there, you would have to fold out this great big old map book or a laminated map and follow the road signs. And a navigator was necessary back in those days to help you find where you were going to get to your destination. Today, we just plug our phones into our cars and we let Apple or Google tell us how to get from point A to point B. So, like I said, road maps are important and can be a very vital, important thing in our life to help us. And that's what the Bible is to us. The Bible is God's roadmap for us in our journey with Him. So not only, and there's different avenues, just like you can plot out on a map if you're going to go on vacation, you're going to go here, here, and here. You can plot out how you're going to get from A to B to C back to A again. So, there's a lot of different paths, there's a lot of different courses God can send us on, and we're only going to find that through the Word. Now, the reason that we're kind of, going through and talking about this Backslider's Roadmap back to God, not that I'm trying to say that everyone in here is backslidden on God, but it is something that is beneficial to us to where when somebody we know is backslidden, we can help them, as we discussed the last time we were together, about how the Bible tells us those of us that are spiritual are to help our brothers in need, or to help restore them in the meekness. So that's kind of what we're really looking at, is just some of the telltale signs of backsliding. If somebody we know feels comfortable to come to us and reveal that to us, then we can be there to help them in restoring that relationship back to God. It can be done on your own. I've done it many times. And sometimes it's nice to have someone that you can count on, that you can go to in confidence and express a desire or a need to get back into a proper relationship with God, and have somebody that can help guide you. And that's kind of what we're wanting to do here in looking at this, is to kind of prepare us to be that type of person, that type of friend, that type of mentor, whatever, to help aid someone find their way back to God. There is a process that can be taken to help someone do that, and we find that in Jeremiah chapter number 6, verse number 16. If you would like to turn your Bibles there, we're mainly kind of looking at one verse and everything else, but believe it or not, in this one verse are 5 steps that we're going to be looking at. The first one and possibly the second one today. But in Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 16, it says, "Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways and see, and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein." And of course, when we met last time, it's kind of hard to believe, but in my notes right here, I put the word briefly. Go through the introduction, and we spent a whole class going through the introduction because the Lord kind of got involved. But anyway, when we met last time, we ended up talking the majority of the class about the parallels between the nation of Israel in this time and how America and modern day Christianity kind of mirror one another. The nation of Israel was in the first, from chapter number 3 and verse number 6 in Jeremiah all the way up through chapter number 5, God has put the burden on Jeremiah to warn the nation of Israel about the coming judgment that God has in store for them. And he goes through that whole thing. And then we come up to chapter number 6 here, and this is where God really finished laying out the destruction of Judah, where the enemy's coming from, and everything else, trying to bring it down to a point to where they would listen and turn back to God. Now, we have some of the same warnings in the Bible, even for us today. The Bible tells us that whoever stands with Israel shall be highly favored. If you rise up against Israel, you're going to go down. And right now, America, in the leadership that we have, is teeter-tottering one moment and rising up against Israel, and then on the next minute, they're standing with Israel. And it's a very dangerous place that we as in America are right now when it comes to God's crown jewel, Israel. He's going to always protect his people. I mean, I know right now the big thing is all the Palestinian stuff and Israel stuff that you see on the news and on different things. You hear about all these crazy things going on college campuses. I mean, it got to the point this past week that they even had a hearing from the predominant higher education colleges, such as Harvard and Yale and all of those, some of the elite. They had an anti-Semitism hearing in Washington, D.C., where they're trying to get these college presidents to come to put on record that they stand against any kind of retaliation towards a Jewish person on their campus. And they would not take a stand and say, that's not what we're about. That's not what they wouldn't even do that. Now, these are some of the most prestigious and highly thought about institutions in America. And that's why I say we are teeter-tottering on very treacherous ground in our leadership in this country today. But as we see the we were talking about the parallels and how they were similar and everything else, yet we see how we talked about last week about how both of us have become independent. We have gotten to the point to where we no longer have a dependency for God. We can make things happen on our own. And a lot of times when we get to that point, we wind up walking away from God. And that's a very dangerous ground to be on as well. But in looking at the 5 different steps that are crucial for getting back in fellowship with God and helping someone do so, as we see here in the first part of verse number 16, it says, stand. This after it says, verse 7, the 5th word, stand ye in the ways. Stand. That's the first thing. We live in a world today to where the society is keeping everybody busy. I remember when I was younger, growing up. I mean, we didn't have a whole lot of places to go. We didn't have a whole lot of things to do and so forth. I mean, I remember coming up as a elementary school kid. Basically, my life was we got up, we went to school. Mom would either come and get us, or we would ride the bus to my grandmother's house, and then my mom would come get us. We went home, we eat, and we did whatever we did at the house. Then we went to bed. That was it. That was all the nightlife and the exciting things that I did growing up when I was younger. I was involved in played some sports growing up and everything else, and we would go to football practice or baseball practice or even basketball practice and everything else. And don't shoot me, but that was before European football, soccer. I'm not a soccer guy. I know you are, John. I'm sorry. But that was before soccer became popular here in the United States with younger kids and so forth. But, back in my day, that was my day. So, like I said, we would do those things, but that was about it. Nowadays, I mean, you come home and, I mean, we've got this going on, like my cousin, he's got his youngest daughter. They've got her highly involved in dance, and everything else, and they're having to take her to this practice, to that practice, to doing this, to doing that, for this recital and this thing and that thing. And him and his wife are constantly running like chickens with their head cut off. And a lot of times that's the way we are today. When we're not only just getting up and going to work and having family time, but mom and dad are split up, running this kid here, that kid here, doing this, doing that, whatever, and we're just running and running and running, and we're never. And a lot of times when we come here to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, we kind of wonder why we don't really feel that presence of God in our life, because we're so busy doing everything else today that we leave little time for God. So when we're thinking about all the movement that we have going on in our lives, I know this age group in here, you have some going to school, you have some going to work, you have some doing both of those, and there's a lot of movement going on in our lives. Not only just physical movement, going here, going there, going doing this, going doing that, but then there's also the social media stuff that we get wrapped up in. And what time that we do have an opportunity to sit still, what are we doing? We have our heads buried in our phone, and I'm just as guilty. Don't Don't throw anything at me. Don't throw your Play-Doh or anything like that you have in your Christmas stocking. But like I said, I'm just as guilty. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that we have today to fight against is just this constant need to know information and things that's going on around us. The people that we like, the people that we follow, this and that and different things. And we're, like I said, and when we are kind of down and we're busy chasing rabbits and doing different things in social media, on our phones, on the computer, iPad, whatever device it is that we have to use, we're busy there. We're busy doing that. But when we think about the word stand, what does that, I mean, if you're doing something and somebody says just stand still, what happens? Everything stops. What happens when we stop? We become aware of things going on around us. Like right now, you're hearing the rain dropping on the thing out here and everything else. But, I mean, try it. If I would say try it. I don't really mean it to actually try it. But if you're ever somewhere that's in a little bit of a crowd, just kind of, you'll be surprised at how much noise going on around us that we don't really pay attention to till you get into somewhere that's busy and you just kind of stop, listen, and pay attention to all the things that's going on around us. Because a lot of times we're just as wrapped up in that as everybody else is around us. And that's what happens. That is one of the biggest things that we have to fight as Christians. That's one of the biggest weapons the devil has to keep us from growing and to keep us from moving forward the way that we should, the way that we need to when it comes to moving forward with God and our walk with Him and our relationship with Him. It's because we're so busy doing everything else. And a lot of times, I mean, that can even come down to even, relationships, personal relationships, friendships that we have. As long as we're doing something with a group of friends, generally, you're close. But when one goes in a separate direction or another one goes in another direction in their life, what happens? That friendship breaks down. The same thing happens with us and God. When we get busy, caught up in doing everything else that we're doing, that we need to do, that we put on ourselves, society's put on us, our responsibilities at work or whatever they are, all of these different things, when all of those pressures start weighing and coming in on us, a lot of times we just get so overwhelmed that before we know it, we're so far removed in our spiritual life, in our spiritual walk with God, that we don't even remember or know what happened. I mean, the Bible gives us a perfect example of that with Samson. And the fact, and we talked about this probably last time we were together, how his strength lied in his hair and in the covenant that his parents made with God, and that his hair would not be cut. He knew that, and he toyed around with the Philistines until he finally got down to the point to where he told Delilah, and he had played around and played around and played around and got so far away from God that at that time, when the Bible even tells us that after she shaved his head, he didn't even realize that the power of God had departed from him. A lot of times, that's the way we are. We will get so wrapped up in everything going on around us that a lot of times we just forget and don't realize how far away from God we've actually gotten. So when we come to that point to where the Bible here, Jeremiah says, stand ye in the ways. Stand still. It heightens our ability to pay attention to what's going on around us. When we stand, all movement stops. The things that we're doing stop. When we just take a moment for ourselves, everything stops. We're able to think clearly. Because if we're not careful, we're so caught up and so busy in going and doing and running here, running there, that's all is on our mind. And when we get to that point to where we can just stop and settle down for just a minute, then we become more aware of what's going on around us. We'll become more aware of where we stand in our relationship with God, and tying it into a spiritual side. But physically, when we stop and you start thinking, man, when was the last time I prayed? I don't even remember. Wow. When was the last time I even went to church? I've been so busy on Sunday, had this and that, Wednesday night, whatever it is. When we get to that point to where we just stop, we come to a standstill. What's going to happen? I mean, you could try this. I don't suggest it. I'm not telling anybody to do so. But we've all been there. We've all seen something similar to this. But how many of you have been behind somebody that missed their turn and just bows up and stops in the road? Does traffic normally stop going, just everybody coming and going? Does everybody else stop? Or do they just keep going and start blowing the horn and letting you know how much they are a fan of yours? Just in that analogy alone, that tells us that when we get to that point to where we stop, doesn't mean everybody else is going to stop around us. They're going to keep going. They've got things they've got to do. They've got places they've got to go to and different things. But when we get to that point to where we just stand and we stop and we have a moment to just clear our minds and think about God for a minute, that's when we realize just how far removed from His presence we actually are. So, stand. It gives us the ability, our movement stops and we have the ability to see the path that we're on and the direction we are headed. A lot of times we get to the point to where we're just kind of going through the motions. We get so tied up in a routine. And I'm sure if everybody in here stopped for just a minute, I know we're talking about stopping, standing, being still, but if everybody stopped and just reflected on their life, we could see how routine our lives have become, that we just go through the motions. I will tell this story. Back when, and I probably sent this out to a lot of you, and these two heard it. You've never heard it probably, but when I was 18, August of my 18th birthday, 18th year, I should say, in August, I got sick. I had a nurse friend of my dad's that we went to church with. We was over at her house doing some work because I was helping him at that time in my life for a job and stuff. In the summer, I'd always help him and stuff. And this is the summer going up into my senior year of high school. And we're at her house, and I'm just like, I can't get my breath, and I'm wheezing. And she goes, come here and sit down. She goes and gets her stethoscope, and as a good nurse always has one with them. And she starts listening to my lungs, and she tells my dad, she said, you need to get him to a doctor. Well, he tells my mom, and we go to the doctor, and my doctor at the time diagnosed me with pneumonia. And, I'd heard of pneumonia, never experienced it. It's not fun, I can tell you that much. But this was just the tip of the iceberg for the next several years of my life. I go through that. I actually went to school the first semester of my senior year of high school. I made it to the first Monday, the third Monday, and the sixth Monday, and then I didn't go back till after the next semester. In that time, I find myself sometime in October, leading up into late September, into October, we go to the doctor. He takes a chest x-ray, and just right here in the center of my chest, where you would see the largest part of my heart and part of my lung, there's just a black circle. You can't see ribs, you can't see lungs, you can't see heart, you can't see anything. Just this dark circle. And that circle was about that big, right in the center of my chest. Then they're like, this is not normal. We should be able to see, and they were telling me, we should be able to see the rest of this rib, the rest of that rib. We should be able to see your heart. We should be able to see your lungs. But that's not normal. So then that takes us on down another road. And fast forward, just as mysteriously as the chest x-ray came in and they put up, and here's this black mass in my chest. And then a couple of months later, I come back in, they take another x-ray, and it's completely gone. I'm in the hospital for a week at Fort Sanders. I had, you name it, you at the time, now this was 20 years ago, 30 nearly, actually 30 years ago. Wow. Time has a way of getting away from you. 30 years ago, I wound up, whatever test you could come up with, they ran on me. I don't know how many diabetic tests run, I was put through the ringer. I was a pincushion for about 3 months. Every time I went to the doctor, they're sticking me. I was used to be afraid of needles, now it don't bother me. I was stuck so much. But anyway, they told me I had cancer. They told me I had this. They told me I had that. They tested me for AIDS. They tested me for everything under the sun, just trying to rule whatever out. Nobody could figure it out. Nobody. And I get through that, and everything kind of cleared up. But I still had problems with dealing with a lot of chest pain. And it was so that when it started, it would hit on one side or the other of my chest and go across. And by the time, if it started here, by the time it got to about right here, or if it started here, it would get to about right here, I was out. And I was out for like a day and a half, 30 hours, 36 hours, pushing 40. I would not know what world I was in or nothing. But because and I hadn't been driving that long by this time. I've been driving since I was 16, and this is when I'm 18 and into my 19, I was 19. So 3 years max of driving. But God had a way of watching over me to the point to where when I'd be driving and that would hit. I wouldn't know how I got home. Mom and her husband would hear me pull into the yard, in the driveway at the house. And 30 minutes, 40 minutes would pass, and they're like, he ought to have been in here by now. They thought I might be sitting out in the car listening to the radio or whatever. And then they'd get up and come check on me, and the car door standing wide open, and they would come out and find me laid out in the gravel in the driveway. I've laid out there and been rained on, I don't know how many times, and everything. And they'd come out there, drag me, put me in the bed, and then a day or so later I'd come to and not know what happened. One time I was taking her home. It hit me halfway between Washington Pike and Emory Road on that stretch of Roberts. I drove her all the way home. And I had a manual 5-speed pickup truck. And I don't know how I changed the gears. I don't know how I got there. I remember leaving my house. I remember going by, at the time was House Mountain Market. And then I don't remember until I woke up at her house. A day or so the next day. Way up in the day. It wasn't in the morning, it was way up in the day that I woke up at her house. Somehow she drugged me into the house, put me in her brother's bed, and that's where I woke up. We get to the point to, and I'm saying all this because we get to the point a lot of times in our lives that it becomes so routine and so mundane, to the point to where we're doing things so subconsciously we don't even realize it. And somehow with God's protective hand and what subconscious ability that I had, I was able to get to where I was going safely. And I can only, and I'm here to tell you, the only reason I got home, or the only reason I got her home and didn't kill both of us, is because God was there with us. He protected me. And I probably at the time wasn't worth protecting all that much. I was not the best model for Christianity in my teenage years. But God had a plan for my life. And I believe He's seen me through the roughest years of my life so that I could get to where He wants me at. And I honestly and truly believe that it's here that God had saved me for. But when we get to that point to where we stand and we can zero in on what God's trying to do in our life, that's the first step. That's the first step to getting back into that right relationship with our Heavenly Father. And that's the first step we need to help others realize. And a lot of times in doing that, helping others, it's revealing the things in our life that help others. So just a thought. Stand, and I need to write this up here. I've been meaning to. But one, stand.
Is part of your penance wearing that suit?
No, this was a personal decision. Y'all are free to go. Thank you.